Our our speaker for this month is Ivana Filipovich, formerly from Serbia, now living in Vancouver. And take it away, Ivana.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Donna, for this invitation. I actually met Donna recently at Seattle Short Run, as well as Roberta. We were at the Fantagraphics Gallery event first, and then at the festival as well. I do know about their comics, and I was trying to remember when I actually saw those comics, and I can't remember if I saw them while I was still living back in former Yugoslavia, or if it was here. It was most likely back there, to be honest, but I cannot actually pinpoint the date. My memory is pretty bad that way. If you ask me about dates, years, and stuff like that, I'm like, no clue. Usually I have to count on my fingers, kind of like, how old am I? to take out a calculator and stuff like that, which is not good for an architect. So it's good that I actually switched my occupation to something else. I'll share my screen and I'll start this hopefully fun presentation for you. If you have any questions, anything you want to comment on, just feel free to do that. I think it's a group that's small enough and we can just chit chat throughout. And let me just do the share and we'll start. And let's just get this little thing in as well, slideshow. And here we are. So yes, as you heard already, I came here from Serbia, former Yugoslavia, in '99, and I picked Vancouver because I had a friend here, and she actually told me about skiing. She said, you know, you're gonna really love it. It's kind of like half an hour from downtown, and you'll have to ski. And I said, well, that sounds pretty good to me compared to war situation and all the other things that were happening back home. But since most of you don't know me, I thought I would start with just a couple of really basic things about my comics. It's primarily slice of life. I consider myself a specialist for short literary comics, but that's a format that's not very popular, and there are no outlets for it here, especially. In North America, maybe there are like a couple of magazines that would print something like that at this point, and some of those are pretty out of reach, like the New Yorker, for example. But in Europe, you still have some of those magazines running, and occasionally I'm able to publish something there as well, which is good. Still, I love literature, and one of the reasons I went into comics is because I kind of merged my love of literature and my love of drawing. So one thing that I really always wanted to do, and we'll talk more about it, is increase the variety and complexity of female characters. When I started reading comics, it was even worse, much worse than it is today, of course. Today we do have a lot of young blood, let's say, and a lot of interesting female characters or diverse characters as well, which is great to see. So I moved to Canada in '99, and then I didn't draw comics from the year 2000 to 2017, mostly because I needed to make a living. Had a job that was pretty intense, and I just didn't have the time and capacity to do comics on top of everything, on top of my professional career. To just clarify, my professional career was at that point in educational media. I was lucky to start working at a university at a unit that made educational media. including documentaries, websites, large productions for education purposes for anybody from little kids like preschool to university level education. And then in 2017, I kind of said, you know what, I feel the pressure of not actually working in comics, and I wanted to go back to it. So I decided to start again, and of course I took a pencil and I was like, oh my God, I don't know how to draw anymore. So I had to relearn everything, and it was kind of like pretty grim for a while, but I stuck with it, and I think I will continue. I have to say, this award that I got from my short comics collection, that's called Where Have You Been, was a total surprise. I did not expect to win anything. The book, I sent it to a competition just thinking, well, if nothing else, then the people who are on the committee will see it. And at least a few more people will hear about me and know about my comics, and maybe they'll like them. It turned out that they liked it quite a bit. So all of a sudden I got all this attention, and it was really incredible. After that, this year I had a graphic novel published. It's a very short, 60 pages graphic novel with Conundrum Press.
It's the Cartoonist meeting, and I wanted to listen to it.
And it's kind of like a Vancouver noir story. As one of the friends came up with this, name for it. I think it's a pretty good one. It's better than what I had in mind, in any case. And we'll see some of the work from that graphic novel during this talk as well. And I also wanted to show you just a list of other things that I am interested in. Increasing the profile and visibility of comic arts and artists, sharing helpful knowledge. I have a lot of experience in grant writing because I was working at an educational media unit, and we're hearing somebody who has the microphone on.
Muted him, so.
I'm not sure who it is. But yeah, over the years, I had to, together, of course, with my team, apply for funding for educational media, and that equipped me with pretty good knowledge and understanding of how to write these grants. I always encourage people to participate in democracy, encourage voting in everything from restaurant awards to federal government. There are good reasons for that, of course. As we know, we are at an age where these things can be deadly. We thought that we want certain freedoms, and then all of a sudden those freedoms started disappearing. And I especially encourage cartoonists to participate in local and federal granting agency processes. And what I mean by that is kind of like, if you have an opportunity to actually participate as one of the people who are marking these proposals, that will give you an insight into, first of all, you'll get training, and you'll know all the details about how to apply later on. And you will also help pick the best, for example, cartoonists. We know that there are not that many cartoonists who are participating in these granting agencies and working for granting agencies that potentially give money to cartoonists. And another thing that I really need to do more of is to write more reviews of comics and graphic novels, especially by local authors, and post them on either Goodreads or other sites. Those reviews are extremely useful. For example, if you have, let's say, about 40 reviews on Amazon or on Goodreads, your book will start showing up in feeds. Under that, it just doesn't work. So it is important for others. It's important for me as well. But I like to definitely promote comics and authors whose work I respect. So I thought it would be interesting to talk to you first a little bit about the comic art scene in the Balkans. You're probably not familiar. So here is one example. Of course, as in other countries in Europe, we had quite a huge selection of comics, and there is a weekly magazine that's still in print called Politik in Zabavnik, that has the center dedicated to comics. And those comics usually are a mix of either US comics, French or Belgian comics, and sometimes even domestic ones. So it is a famous and really old magazine, as you can see, started coming out in '39. Some of these names will be familiar. I was talking to Bill. He did recognize quite a few additional names on this list. But yeah, some of the names you're familiar with, of course, is Lieutenant Boobery, and then Batman. I'm not sure if you read any of the other ones, but for example, the one that I have on the cover here, if you can see, is Benito Iacovity's Coco Bill. Now, people who are familiar with the Mad magazine will probably say, wait a second, this looks familiar. I think there was cross-pollination, and I don't know who was influenced by who, but Don Martin comes to mind when we see images like this. So quite a long tradition of comics in former Yugoslavia. A lot of choices. Zabavnik was one of the choices, but it was my favorite magazine when I was growing up. I actually learned to read because my grandfather would start reading it for me, and then he would fall asleep. And I would be so angry. So little by little, I started reading. It was the first thing I ever read in my life, and I have good memories of reading this with my grandfather and enjoying the comics as well. I'm just going to go to the next page to tell you about some of the Italian comics that I read as well. And this is Sergio Bonelli company that's still, of course, producing comics now, maybe even a mix of different kinds. I think they have a lot of vampire comics and other things now, fantasy as well, but back then they were almost purely focused on these fictional Western comics. We were talking about spaghetti Westerns and then the French version. We're not sure if anyone knows the name for the French Western comics, if there is a specific name for it. But yeah, these are kind of like spaghetti Western, totally invented things, unfortunately. And I'm, like everybody else growing up back then without computers or anything else, we kind of trusted these comics. So when I came to Canada, to Pacific Northwest, I was like, wait a second, where are those teepees? Of course, no teepees, nothing of the sort. And this all pretty much kind of like is in line with Karl May German side of things. Some of you do know about that history as well. Karl May, without going to North America, wrote dozens of books about the area and influenced generations and generations of people in Europe. One good thing about it is that people who read these books love North America. So at least on that side of things, you're safe. It is something that I think will go at some point. And I did have some really hard conversations with my colleagues back home this summer, talking about how if they're actually drawing Westerns, maybe they should look into something else. Or if they're depicting indigenous people, maybe, that's not the best thing to do. And of course, they would always respond with why. I really love indigenous people, but there is still no understanding of the fact that there has to be room for indigenous authors and indigenous storytelling as well. And of course, we don't want to have a few generations growing up reading these invented things, no matter how much fun those comics were. And then, as I was growing up, I switched to something a little bit better, in my opinion. This was a magazine, Stripoteka, which was the longest running, one of the longest running comics magazines in this part of Europe. You see by the dates that actually it stopped its run finally in 2019, unfortunately, but it educated generations of cartoonists in former Yugoslavia. So I listed some of the favorites on the side, and some of you are familiar with these comics. I know that Corto Maltese, for example, was recently published a few years ago, I think, here in the North America by the American Library of Comics, I think. So finally, it's available in English, appropriately printed in album sizes. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Paul. I think it's pronounced Gion. I'm not good at French pronunciation or any other pronunciation, as you'll be able to hear during this presentation. And then, of course, Mort Cinder. And Mort Cinder was published here a few years ago by Fantagraphics. And I'm sad to say it sold out, but it's a luxury book, quite big and heavy. I borrowed it from the library. And another author that's on this list is Herman, who is a Belgian author who was quite influential back then. So I'll show you some of the examples. Like, for example, the Hugo Pratt storytelling. Of course, he is considered the father of the literary graphic novel. His Corto Maltese started years before Will Eisner's work, and it's considered really influential in Europe. And yes, I can see here it's the American Library of Comics that did publish Corto Maltese. I would say you would probably find it a bit sentimental now. I probably would as well, but I still like it. I like it especially because of the research that went into all of these albums. Hugo Pratt learned quite a bit from Osterheld about storytelling, but he also was a true researcher. He would definitely go into all the details about the time period, the fashion, everything that is needed for storytelling, visual storytelling especially. So his comics do have quite a bit of history in them. They do cover world events, especially in Europe. There are a couple of albums that cover also Latin America, especially Argentina. So I think it's still an interesting read. Like I said, maybe slightly sentimental, but try it. I don't think you'll be disappointed. And here is some of that research that he would do in terms of how the characters should look like and how they should dress. And it's still actually being done. It's been revived again. He died in 1995. I still remember that day. I was pretty sad that there would be no more Corto Maltese albums by Hugo Pratt. but nowadays is drawn by Bastian. And some of you know there were a really very, very critical posts about him recently, and his exhibition had to be at Angulem had to be canceled because of his apparent misogyny. So I don't know much about that story. And I don't know anything about this comic. I just know that it's now a second album. A new book is coming out this year. And here's one of my really all-time favorites, Paul Gion, probably, like I said, probably butchering his name. An incredible artist with extremely fluid lines, and I don't know that he was present much in the United States market. I think you can probably find some examples in English, but he was mostly popular in Europe. On the right is one of my favorite pages. I just love the elegancy of this page, and it kind of stuck in my mind. So when I was looking for images for this presentation, I really wanted to find this one, and I did. Now, this is Herman. On the left, we have the medieval story, early medieval story. It's from 11th century. A great composition, just fantastic drawing style. And it was one of these very influential comics for me because I looked at it, and it was one of the first times that was kind of like a real, I was reading a real human story. It wasn't just entertainment. And that's why this one stayed with me as well. And you can see that he's just a master, of course. I think there are so many albums of this, and as well as Jeremiah. Jeremiah, again, this is another spaghetti Western, or Belgian best product is chocolate. I'm not sure if we call it chocolate Western or something like that. But yeah, there are like so many authors actually went in there. Actually, Jeremiah is slightly different. Jeremiah is an apocalyptic society in the US after a big war. So again, it's by authors who kind of like have a really huge love for the American West, and are using that for their storytelling. Let's see what's next. And of course, who knows how to pronounce Alberto's last name?
Breccia?
Breccia? Yes. Colin, I can always count on you. You know your stuff.
Oh, I love Brescia.
Yes.
Breccia.
Brescia. Okay, let's learn Brescia. His technique for this comic is actually, I think he used the shaving Gillette, believe it or not. The reason why he has a line like this is not because it's a brush. He was actually dipping the, what's that called? The shaving little Gillettes.
A razor blade.
Razor blades into ink and drawing with that. If you don't believe that, then you can look up some of the videos and you'll see these are huge formats as far as I know. He is, of course, in Argentina, he's like a god. There are huge exhibitions of his work, and he is, with every reason, really, really respected. His son continued doing comics, so he's doing pretty well too, as far as I know. And then I mentioned a huge area of former Yugoslavia. Was a pretty big country. and well, a lot of talent there. And in the 70s, I think it started kind of bubbling up even more. So these are two of my favorite artists from that time, like late 70s. Igor Kordey, who is still very much active. He works with French publishers. And then Mirko Ilic, who is a designer, has an agency in New York. Still occasionally does comics, but he's really, really famous for motion graphics. And I'm sure you watched some of his motion graphics. One of the movies that he is famous for the opening scene, the motion graphics, is You've Got Mail, which I think is a movie about Seattle. Yes, I see David is saying yes, it is. So that's his work. He works with the biggest newspapers in the world. A lot of work is in the New York Times. He still does illustration occasionally. He does really incredible posters. Every single year, he gets included in the yearly best poster selection. So if you want to look it up, I think you'll be really pleasantly surprised with his work as well. I'm just looking at questions. David was saying that the Towers of Boa movie was published in America in the late 80s. And I think it was published actually fairly recently again by Dark Horse. So maybe I'll try and look up a couple of these albums. I don't have my old albums here, except Corto Maltese, which I, believe it or not, I kind of cut it out from old magazines, and I then had it done professionally, so I can have it in its first translation, because I find that often, we have a completely different impression based on translation. And the first translation I read these comics in was the best, I think, because I bought the albums later, and that second version wasn't as good, wasn't as funny. And that's something that it's difficult to translate, and you either have a good translator who can really do this work, honor the work really, or not. It's always a problem, but when you have foreign work, how do you translate things, especially the ones that are not easily translatable, that have to do with culture and things like that. Oh, You've Got Mail is set in New York, Sleepless in Seattle, right? It's set in Seattle. Thanks for that. So these two comics, I think, were the first time I actually saw something that was really art, not just literature. The poster of Shakti, the horse that's here on the screen, I saw at my friend's place, and I went into his room and I was like, what is this? I need to know. And that's when I started following these domestic authors. They were just incredibly good. And I think it's actually sad that Mirko Ilic is not doing comics all the time, although he has, of course, a pretty good career as a graphic designer. Igor Kordey is doing comics, but not with his own scripts. He's always partnering with another person to do a script. But his output is huge, so he does publish quite a few comics a year. But my, first love, of course, are these comics that were done. Some of those were done using some of the contemporary music back then from former Yugoslavia. And I hope these things are of interest to you. You know, it's kind of like an area that not very many people know about in terms of comics. And here we come to the common friend for David and I, Sasha Rakizic or Alexander Zograf. Psychonaut was published by Fantagraphics, no less. This is his interest in kind of like sleep and dreaming and lucid dreaming as well. He is still making comics on that subject, and is also quite famous for something that he's doing now, which is going to flea markets and buying old images, old diaries by people who passed away. He's finding really interesting things, and you can also look it up. He found diaries by people who survived Second World War or did not. One famous story is about a person who was imprisoned, and it's pretty hard to read, but interesting work. He is also doing a lot of lecturing and has a really vast amount of knowledge about comics. He even knows more about comics in this area than I will ever do, that's for sure. And then on the side, we have Danilo Milošev, Vostok, my co-conspirator. Him and I did a political comics, and we're happy we didn't end up in prison. It was during the Milosevic's rule, and we did kind of like have some easily recognizable characters in that comic book. One of which is you know, a person that was imprisoned in Hague, for example. That would not be a happy occasion if we ever ran into this person. I'm not going to even say his name, but another thing that we kind of predicted with that comic is that one of the people who are currently in the government, which by the way is very, very corrupt, is actually a drug dealer. This person just this year got on the American list of drug dealers, simply put, and was sanctioned. And back then that was just kind of like a funny idea, but it's extremely scary to hear that you have a government in which ministers are actually officially drug dealers that are wanted by United States. So that's the current situation. It's not much better than during Milosevic's time, unfortunately. I wish it was, but it kind of went backwards. And people who are in power now in Serbia are actually quite used to be quite close to Milosevic. So I'm not going to even go into details. It's just seems like a deja vu from the 1990s, unfortunately. And then I think I mentioned that I was quite influenced by literature and especially realism. Let me just check the chat. Yes, Vostok continues to make very subversive comics, for sure. He has a great sense of humor, and it continues to poke fun at everything and everybody. So here are some of my literary idols. On this page we have the guys. On the next page we'll have the girls. When I started reading, I kind of like was a voracious reader since the early days and read really fast through, you know, hundreds and hundreds of books. And then one day I didn't have anything to read at home, so I started reading Tolstoy. It was way beyond my comprehension, I have to say, but it kind of stayed with me. and there is this interest I have in Russian literature, especially 3 people who are listed here were considered Russian classics. And Daniel Karms is a Russian absurdist, which is slightly different, but that's the twist that I like to have in my storytelling, something fairly unexpected. And the other 3 are fairly kind of conventional realists, but I really always loved Chekhov and his storytelling, and I still have like a set of Chekhov's books here that I kind of reread on a regular basis. Like literally once a year, I read one of these books again. There is a different. What I like about his writing, especially, is this humanity, and then a mix of tragedy and comedy that he has. And I also read his books and of correspondence with friends and other artists where he describes his way of writing. And I thought it was pretty funny. He would say, "Don't say blue sky. Everybody knows the sky is blue. Why the hell would you need to say that in a sentence?" And other instructions that were pretty much, when I think about it, they're very close to what Stephen King says in his book about writing. You know, cut out all this fat and focus on really clean storytelling. And that's something I appreciate a lot. And of course, the other side is having characters that are close to life as much as possible. So Chekhov's characters were actually his friends and family. So he ended up having no friends because he literally wrote them all in. I'm not that way. I have to say, I'm not that kind of like exploitative. I find inspiration sometimes in real life, but most of the time that's kind of like molded into something else, or I take a few different storylines, mold them into one. I know a lot of storytellers have this method as well. We try and stay close to reality, but it is exponentially more exuberant or whatever, because we find that real life is not actually that interesting, or maybe it's too interesting. So it is based on realism, but I like to have a bit of a twist in my storytelling as well. Apparently, Tolstoy and Chekhov loved each other, and but Chekhov actually wrote to a friend of his that Tolstoy said to him on his deathbed. He was dying when he received Chekhov again. He said to Chekhov, "You're worse than Shakespeare." I was like, was that good or bad? There is a new book actually that I'm looking forward to reading. More discovered correspondence about Chekhov, so I will be probably getting that one. I definitely want to have every bit of information. I am a super fan of Chekhov, as you can see. So here are the girls. Some of the girls you're familiar with, I hope. Maybe you're familiar with all of them. Of course, Mariko Tamaki, Canadian storyteller who, together with Julian Tamaki, is famous for graphic novels, of course. And then I have Hilary Mantel, who unfortunately died 2 years ago. John Didion, I just, that's a master beyond reach, pretty much. And then an interesting figure, Joy Williams, and I know this is a common name. So this Joy Williams has a book that's called 99 Stories of God, and I recommend it to you. It's kind of like this again, combination of slightly absurd things. I do like that type of storytelling. But Hilary Mantel, I have to say, the actual command of English language is just outstanding. I don't, I'm not saying I will try to emulate any of these people. It's just a pleasure to read their books. And then if you go into cartoonists, and we have some familiar names and maybe some that are not that familiar. Of course, Jillian is there too. And then we have Julia, who I think this book was published by Fantagraphics, but it's out of print currently. Beautiful drawing style as well. I love Jorge Gonzalez, who is, I think, an Argentinian living in Spain. His methods are kind of a combination of traditional, really painterly backgrounds with digitally put together characters that he draws by pencil and then sometimes paints them as well. So it's an interesting method. It looks great, and I only recently got a book that's in English because until recently he didn't have a book in English language. So it's one of the first ones. And then we have the French genius, Claire Bretéché, who I didn't know was a woman when I first saw her comics. I saw her comics in a women's magazine back home. And I opened it and I was like, what? This guy is making fun of women. Look at it. And look at her women, like and those women had really gigantic noses. They were really drawn kind of like not very flattering, I have to say. So I was like angry for a while until I learned that it's actually a woman. So it's funny how your perspective shifts once you learn something like that, and then you're kind of like, oh, this is genius. It's not bad at all. Fantastic, again, incredible author. I think there are some English language books that are available here. And the last one is GP, who I think Fantagraphics publishes now. The one that stood out for me is Note for a War Story. This comic, actually, I think a lot of people think it's based on the Balkan Wars. I don't know that it is, but it's how you end up, committing crimes and how just from being a teenager who just wants to have fun, all of a sudden you are in these incredibly difficult situations. So an interesting book, and I think it was awarded at Angulem as the best book of the year a while ago. One thing that I know about GP and that drives me crazy, he can do a page in watercolors in 20 minutes. I actually measured that. I was like, oh, am I ever gonna be at the level where I can do a goddamn comic page, in 20 minutes in full color? That is just outstanding. But his art is outstanding as well. He has like really fluid line. He does play with the style throughout the pages. It may not be the same style on every single page. And then, as I mentioned, sometimes uses watercolors or gouache, and all of a sudden it's a color page after all these black and white pages. So hopefully these are giving you some ideas about what you can read as well and enjoy. And, at one point, I started looking at some of these comics and thinking, wait a second, all of these women look the same. And, so Hugo Pratt as well. I was like, well, that's the same lips on every woman he draws. And then Milo Manara is guilty of that. He just changes the hairstyle. It's the same woman every single time. She has this kind of like adolescent face of a maybe 10-year-old girl, and then different wigs, pretty much. And it started to bother me. And in this case, for maybe this, I'm not even sure, maybe this is the same character. But yeah, it started to bother me, and I started to think about, like, is there something I can do? Maybe I can do something. I'm a big complainer. If you know me, then you know that about me. I complain about everything and everybody. And it's to my detriment, of course. But this one complaint I wanted to do something about. I wanted to actually start making comics myself. This is another author from France, Anki Bilal. And again, I'm like looking at the lips and I'm like, wow, do you know how to draw some other type of female face? I know a lot of people love his comics, so do I. They're a lot of fun. But and I understand, of course, as a cartoonist, you either have a type that you like or is easy to draw for you, or in cartooning we have to simplify, and sometimes we, by simplifying, maybe stick to the same things over and over again. So I do the same. I'm not saying that I am better than these folks by any means. All I'm saying is that I actually sat down, noticed these things, and said, okay, well, maybe I can try something. So I did, and this is basically, I don't know, early 90s, something like that. First experiments with comics. I started, of course, thinking, like every beginner cartoonist, I'll do a 500-page comic book that's going to just amaze everybody. I'm sure we all start doing the same thing. Instead of starting with a small project, a couple of pages, we all think about, like, building worlds and, doing something massive. So I, pretty much did the same. And this is one comic that I maybe drew a couple of pages off, and then I said, wait a second, this really is a huge undertaking. Maybe I should think this through. For a first comic, it seems kind of ludicrous. It's still an interesting story. It's a story about an apocalyptic world. And people in this story are actually in the Louvre storage. So they live with these masterpieces that were saved from a nuclear disaster in an underground building. And at some point they start kind of rebelling against art. And here we have a character that's, of course, modeled on Peter Murphy from Bauhaus. Used to be my favorite singer. So, of course, we all start with using these references, idols in comic books. So I used Peter Murphy. And lucky for him, I didn't continue with this. Oh, let me just check the messages. I keep talking. Bill was saying, regrettably, I don't think I'm much better. Sorry, Bill, I didn't get this in time. What was this about?
It was about the doing the same face in woman.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I can also show you examples of my art, which are pretty much the same, but at least I'm aware of it, if nothing else. And so you are you, Bill? Looks like. So yeah, I gave up on the 500 page graphic novel, and while I was experimenting with comics, things were happening in former Yugoslavia. So it was a big country. It had a form of socialism / communism was slightly different than the Eastern Bloc. We were never in the Eastern Bloc. I'm sure many people know about that, but it was more lenient system than the one in the Eastern Bloc. We were amongst the unaligned nations. So we had a lot of business dealings with countries like Egypt and Libya or India, especially big construction companies would do really big projects in, I'm talking dams and roads and things like that. That's how the country earned the money, by exporting this knowledge throughout, North Africa or beyond. But things were getting worse and worse. I'm not going to go into details because that's a really complicated story. I don't want to even tackle it in any kind of comic form, graphic novel form. And I think the subject is just, nobody knows what happened. One day you had friends all over former Yugoslavia. The next day, all of a sudden, you were not living in the Mediterranean. You were living in Central Balkans. So things were pretty wild for a while. And we also, of course, at that point started having all kinds of economic problems, high inflation, and all these other things. But here it is, my first published comics, the Overture comic came out in '94. There we go. And this is the first and last time that I'm going to have my name on the same page as Mavius. I don't think that's going to happen again. The publishers were really, really happy with the work and very supportive. Back then, equality was just a given. So as I started doing comics, all of a sudden I gained like a bunch of brothers, and they were all really taking care of me and making sure that I have places to publish, that I know certain rules about comics, and it was actually an easy step into comic arts. And this is the comic that started coming out monthly, but unfortunately, because the situation in the country actually deteriorated quite a bit, a lot of the magazines had to stop publication, and this magazine was one of the victims of that situation. It was getting worse and worse with inflation. We actually didn't have much food. So my father, for example, would cross the border, go to Romania to buy some food for us. We had basically border blockades and economic sanctions, and there wasn't much food, especially nothing fancy. But even with that, like we had a sack of flour and we were like making bread a million different ways. Or we had to, for example, go and pick mushrooms. So my father learned how to, pick mushrooms or not mushrooms to pick, so we can have something to eat. And we were all working. I mean, it wasn't like we didn't have jobs. I was actually the city's urban planner. But I was wearing my grandmother's dresses that I adopted or made pants or, whatever, sweaters that I took out, from storage that my mother bought like 20 years earlier, stuff like that. But yeah, it was pretty gruesome. Let's see the messages again. What city? Jagodina. So I had to move from Belgrade, where I used to live, and move back in with my parents. That was fun. As you can imagine, my father was like, don't come back home after 10 p.m. I was like, I am 30 something, leave me alone. So it wasn't fun. Plus it was really, really bad time for the country, for all of us. we were protesting, like, my friends and myself, we were protesting nonstop against the Milosevic government with very little effect. During that same time, I was doing more in terms of publishing, and I had luck to publish in literary magazines, and things were starting to kind of emerge as themes for me. One of the biggest themes, of course, if anyone has read any of my comics, is the psychology of characters, and that is actually what attracted Andy Brown, the publisher at Conundrum Press, to my comics. He read some of my comics, loved one of the stories, which is in the collection, and that basically got extended into a graphic novel. And one of the things I used to do is kind of write stories that are slightly based on my neighborhood because they were driving me crazy. So at least something I could get from that relationship was to use some of the events and write these one-pagers usually that I would give to magazines that can't pay. So that's how the one-pagers in my case started. And I was trying, my focus was actually becoming architect-archaeologist. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. I completed my architecture studies, but I never completed my archaeology studies, and I moved to Canada, where there isn't much work for an architect-archaeologist, if any. But I was doing a lot of work with archaeologists, and still is one of my happiest periods because I do love history and archaeology. I know Colin loves history too. He's a history buff, and here's one of the reconstructions for things that I did for my archaeology friends and bosses. And my country was in the meantime getting smaller and smaller. As you can see, this is all kind of like still called Yugoslavia, and then on the right is now just Serbia. So I at some point stopped saying that I was like from Yugoslavia, because so many years have passed, and there are generations that don't even know what that means. Here, the red dot is actually where I ended up in central Serbia, smack right in the middle, in this situation where, I didn't want to kind of like declare myself as a Serb, because, to be honest, a lot of people back home don't even know their origins. I know my mother's family is probably Serbian. My father's family is most likely Montenegrin. And we are all totally mixed. This is an area which had so many wars. Multiple armies went through the country down to Turkey or Greece or Middle East or China. So it's a big highway, and some of the people who liked it, they stayed. That's why we have, for example, a Celtic fortress in my grandma's village. And why do I have a Petrov piano on the right? Well, the Petrov piano was sold so I can buy a plane ticket to Vancouver, and was the last thing we had of value that we could sell. And I'm glad that it was a black one, because apparently that was popular and it got sold. And I ended up having enough money to pay for my trip. Here I tried kind of like, maybe I can do illustration, because I knew maybe that's slightly better paid. So then I was thinking also, children's books. And of course I picked a subject that's really inappropriate for children. What else? So this is Mary Tudor. People who know history know how unhappy she was as a child. And I thought that was a great subject for a children's book. So these are some of the illustrations. And of course, I wanted to do it in Holbein style as well. Speak about, pretentious person. That's me. Nothing ever came of it. I do have a couple of really lovely illustrations that I quite like. I don't think I'll sell originals ever. But then that got kind of useful when I finally got a job that I actually wanted to stay in. So that's a university job that I already mentioned. And some of these projects actually required me to do some illustration work. So this is some of my first digital illustration. It's a digital composite, photography composite, and then it's painted on top as well. So the project was very, very interesting. I still have good memories of it. It was about people of the New World. So was describing how the ancient people crossed the Bering Sea into North America. Unfortunately, it's not online anymore because it was using Flash, and that software is dead. It will not get revived. But yeah, you can see some of it is photography and some of it is drawing and painting on top. In some cases, like on the previous illustration, there was actually a 3D image in the back. This is when I first kind of started messing around with 3D images. We had a 3D artist working on our team, and he would do the modeling, and we would try different poses, and then I would import that 3D model and paint on top of it to make it look, you know, like a person with a tattoo and paint on his face. And then, you know, no comics, nothing until 2017. Too busy, you know. Of course, had a really great job. I started actually as a web designer, and went all the way to a director position. Had a lot of work, and was enjoying working with my team and a lot of creative people on that team. Some of us are still at SFU in different roles. I am still at the university. But then, as I said, in 2017, I started feeling like I really need to do something about my art, because I always have stories kind of like percolating in my brain, and I'm always thinking about storylines for whatever reason. I don't know why that is. I didn't need to think about any stories back then, but I did. And this is actually an invitation from, I think, Sasha Rakizic. It's one of these anthologies about dreaming. And I did a short comic about an environmentalist who wakes up in a pool of oil. So it wasn't fun for her, let me tell you that. I don't think the anthology ever came out, unfortunately, but it was kind of like a step back into doing more work and doing more comics. But of course, being an experimenter, I always like to try different things, but I can never stick with one. So this is an experiment, of course, with acrylic. So it's acrylic ink combination, which is kind of like, really, why would you do that? It's difficult to use ink on top of acrylics or the other way around. It's just acrylic is too opaque. But then, I don't know, maybe it's okay. I do enjoy working in traditional media as well. I like the feel of paper. I like working with paints and I like brushes. But then, you know, I also like digital. I like everything. There is no technique that I haven't tried yet, I think. I found through a friend that there is this group in Sweden. They're called Sabon Kultur, or CBK. And they have anthology calls all the time. They're still very much active, and you can look them up and submit your comics. They have a theme, and they select a couple of comics per issue. So this is the one that I drew about. The theme was dictatorship, actually. So I was like, wow, that's like right down my alley. Having lived in a dictatorship, and who knows, possibly again, I really had something to say about that subject. So I did a comic, and I was kind of like, I'm not going to stop until I'm done. And this, believe it or not, was actually drawn in a notebook and then put together digitally. So I was drawing 2 of these a day, but because I couldn't really like make the deadline if I had any kind of like complicated comic art page and complicated flow, I decided to just like split it in 2, just kind of have it like an illustrated story versus a comic. I don't know if you can say this is a comic necessarily, but anyway, it really worked for me. It was good to have deadlines. So I do recommend to people, and especially younger authors, if they ask me what to do about publishing, even if it doesn't pay, what pays to you personally is the fact that you have to meet the deadlines and you have to work as fast as possible. So all of these comics that I did for literary magazines and other magazines, short form comics, collected in this volume of short stories, including the ones I did for the CBK anthologies. And here are the pages of what Sphere got to do with it in its original form. So you can see it's pretty small. Again, experimenting with formats. So I was like drawing really big, drawing really small. I still don't know what works best for me. This was done on a light table and with a 0.2 rapidograph, which is insane. So when Andy Brown said, I want this comic to be extended, I was like, what? I agreed right away, but then I was like, how am I going to do this? But it actually happened. It happened again because, you know, when there is a deadline, I'll reach the deadline. So deadlines do work for me. The other thing that worked was actually applying for some funding to utilize 3D to speed up the process of drawing. Because I wanted to be able to draw as fast as possible. And I didn't want to spend much time looking for references. I use references quite a bit because I don't draw well enough and often enough to be really comfortable. So even if I have like my phone, you know, and I'm just looking at a photo, that's, you know, the drawing may not look like that photo at all, but it makes me more confident to look at a photo for some reason. And I still do that. So what I did is I applied for a learning grant from the Canada Council for the Arts, and I got that grant. So you'll see how I used it. So here is the 3D model of Mia, one of the characters in the comic book, in different poses. So when I started drawing this comic again, I knew that the leopard pants would be problematic, to say the least. Who in the right mind picks a leopard pattern for pants and then has to draw that stuff, you know, on almost every single page? It's, you know, it's just inexperienced and delusional. I don't know. In any case, 3D is really helpful. So now the leopard pants look very good on every page. I actually had people commenting on that saying, wow, how did you do the leopard pants? And I'm like, let me tell you about the leopard pants. And I felt that the character actually had to have these leopard pants because she's quite violent and wild. And in the comic book, she dresses in these animal patterns, which really suit the character. So it does make sense. I started the project thinking that I would work more with a 3D person, and that 3D person would do most of the work, and then I would just get the models and use them. But as creators, we know that if the vision doesn't match, or the product doesn't match, then you have to kind of, you know, dirty your own hands with 3D. So I had to learn how to use DAS. The way it was done, if you're interested in the process, just really quickly, is I purchased a character that looks similar to Mia, and then because it's easier to mold the existing character than to kind of like start from scratch, I took that character, I changed the face to match the look of Mia, and the one thing that I learned right away is that these 3D models, of course, first of all, look very fake. You have to really play with the facial features because our faces are not symmetrical, and the models are really symmetrical and they look bland. So you have to get the eyes kind of like at different heights, different size, and eyebrows completely misaligned, and crooked mouth, and you know, one cheek bigger and another smaller. These things work, and they make characters more believable. The other thing I needed to do is I needed to decrease the breasts and the behind, because all the female models were basically Kardashians. So you get a Kardashian, and then you want to get that Kardashian into some normal shape. So you have to minimize various areas. But one thing we did is also, another thing we did was buy the clothing, because it's expensive and time consuming to make. So we bought the clothing, and then we adopted the clothing that was kind of similar to the character's clothing to match. In this case, actually in the comic, she doesn't have a blouse that's this open, but we couldn't figure out how to close the blouse. So in the images from 3D software, it's just kind of like, okay, that's not the same cut. It doesn't matter. At least it was useful, and it did speed up the process to the point that I was able to do a page a day. That is actually my all-time record. I don't think I'll ever surpass that. But you know, even with all these different tools and photos and whatnot, it is still a lot of work, as you know. And put together, some of these pages don't look like they're from the same graphic novel. So from the first page, this is on the left, the first page I drew digitally for this graphic novel. And on the right is the last page I drew for this graphic novel. And you can see, kind of like, is that the same person drawing? No, those are two different people. But because it's put together in a graphic novel, you know, people don't have the first page and the last page together, so nothing to worry about. I'm the only person who sees these things. I also wanted to talk to you about other experiments, because of course, why would I stop? There are so many interesting things and interesting techniques we can use. And I know we all have on our mind, of course, a financial situation as artists. That's really precarious living, and we're always trying to find a way to do something that would sell or be more of interest to people. So I started doing etching and monoprint. So the first image on the left is an etching with some added acrylic. And the image in the middle and on the right actually monoprints with multiple prints, and then the one on the right actually has painting on top as well. I haven't sold a thing yet, but I like them, and I think I'll continue, if nothing else, just for my own fun. So that's where I'm at right now in terms of my art. But I wanted to talk to you also about some of the cartoonists from BC that you may have heard of. I know Colin is here with us. And Colin, I didn't ask you to include this, but here are some of the people that are very, very inspiring in the BC West Coast area. We have Adam D'Souza with his beautiful comics that really remind me a bit of Charlie Brown. There is that feel to it, like a very sensitive childhood characters. Beautiful stuff. And then we have a true artist, Carol Wojciewicz, who unfortunately, whose property burned down in Lytton fire. This was the fire that basically burned down the entire little town. And all of her belongings were burned, including all of her paintings and all of her comics. I only heard of her because there was actually an announcement on social media about money being collected for her. So we all donated, and I was just shocked by the quality of art. And luckily, she does have some of her comics scanned, and people keep sending her scanned versions of her comics. So comics, I think, are fairly complete, and I would love to see them in a book form. But the paintings are gone. There are only a few photos. And then, of course, we have Colin with his I'm the Passenger Comics in Transit. Colin, did you want to say a few words about this example of your work?
Oh, well, this was done for a Cloudscape project where we actually had cartoons in bus shelters around the city. And so it was one of those things where I had to draw something that was going to be printed big. But I think it worked out pretty well. It's one of the rare times I've actually worked in color, although you notice most of the strip is actually in gray. But yeah, it was a fun challenge. Oh, I was just wondering, are these the ones that were on display in Serbia?
Yes. That's the small exhibition of 12 cartoonists from BC.
Yeah. Well, I went up to visit my bus shelter in South Vancouver and just hung out, see if anybody recognized me from the drawing. And a couple of people did.
Oh, nice. Where is the bus shelter exactly?
49th and Fraser, which used to be where I lived.
Oh, okay.
I lived like a half a block away from the bus shelter. It was a shelter for the 49th and UBC bus.
Oh, I see. And you do have a book with Conundrum Press. We share the publisher.
Yes.
So
It's part of their ongoing series of collections of Canadian small press mini comic artists. I think mine was number 14, and they're doing, I think it was 30, 35 artists, and then they'll be putting out a collection.
nice. And I know it got really nice review recently in the BC review.
Yes.
I love
review
it.
in the BC review, which I must admit I'd never actually heard about before they reviewed my book, but it was still a very nice review.
Fantastic. I'm really glad.
Postmodern mini comics from Conundrum Press.
Yeah, Conundrum, for the folks on this call who are not familiar, is famous for literary quality of their comics, and I certainly recommend that you check it out. We had a table at the Short Run, and I think they're regularly at festivals if you want to buy in person. But yeah, things are available online as well.
I think they also do exclusively Canadian artists.
Yes, correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, and Canadian subjects, I would say. Not necessarily Canadian. There are some fantasy and other forms as well, but yeah, mostly Canadian subjects.
Mhm.
And here's our friend Doug Savage and his Savage Chickens, which you can follow on social media. He draws one cartoon a day on work days, and it's just shocking to me that he's able to complete one each day, and they are so consistent in quality and so much fun. Definitely start following him if you can. Yeah.
His chicken cartoons are drawn on Post-it notes.
Yep, exactly. And then we have Emily Carrington, who had a book published by the Drawn and Quarterly publisher here in Canada. This is a really difficult story to read. It's about sexual abuse, really an important graphic novel, and she is becoming a very important artist as well. I can't wait for her next project. Next one here is Maya McKibben, fantastic illustrator as well. I think they are now mostly doing children's books and illustrations. I do see their art as cover art for anthologies and things like that. I have not seen a comic in a while, but I hope that they will go back to comics as well. So we have something new to read too. And now we have like one of the most famous artists in Canada, Michael Nicole Herculanes, who I have to say was the first one to respond to the call and to participate in this exhibition. And his art was exhibited at the Seattle Art Museum. I would love to see more comics in the Seattle Art Museum, I have to say. That really is a dream of mine, that the environment here becomes slightly more like it is in France, for example, where art is considering comic as art. Of course, Michael's art is undisputably, and shockingly good. I did attend his talk at the Vanka Festival this year. He showed us photos of his gigantic table that he has for these things. He had to be built, custom made to accommodate these huge drawings. Then those drawings are photographed and then cut into pages and issued as comic books. And of course, some of you are familiar with Miriam Libicki. I think she gave a talk to this group as well. Love her work, and especially love her watercolor work. She has an important book out. It's called But I Live, and it's based on experiences of children in Holocaust. These are surviving children, of course, now in their 90s. There are very few left, and their stories, for some reason, were not recorded. They were not considered victims of war. Because they survived. Again, this is a project where there is a merge of academic work and comics, which is an interesting idea, and it's more and more in vogue. There are comics being done in this fashion for academic research, even. I did attend a recent conversation about making comics for research papers. So just so you know. Amy has to leave early, and that's fine because I'm blabbing and blabbing and blabbing. I hope I'm not boring you too much. Rotem Anna, another important author, a new author who actually has a really interesting initiative, which is the nonprofit comics library in Toronto. Some of that work was financed by their own money, you know. So they actually inherited some money. There is an article in the Comics Journal that talks in detail about how that was done. And I actually love the images I was seeing of their art. This actually is an image that's also linked to Holocaust. It was just a very poignant image, and I think this is an up-and-coming author, and there will be some interesting work pretty soon. And some of you know Ryan Hashka, another Canadian author. I somehow ran into his work. I think it was through actually Mirko Ilic, who posted something about his graphic novel Mean Girls. I really like the look of it, this kind of like a noir Hollywood look. The story reminded me of my hometown, where there's a gangster in charge of everything. And it's just so much fun. One of the, I think, my favorites for the year for sure. So I was really happy when he agreed to participate in this exhibition. Another person we have here is Sean Caremaker, a friend here from Vancouver. He also does huge drawings. He does scrolls that are then photographed, scanned, and put in comic book form. But they can be meters and meters long, and it's quite a sight to see them. Zoe is an artist that moved here from Belgium with training in printmaking, and she does monoprint comics. It's a lot of work. Her comics are quite interesting, and I think she has a book coming up as well at Conundrum Press, so she'll join our little group of cartoonists at the Conundrum, the brotherhood and sisterhood of folks here. And I think that's the end of my presentation. If you're not asleep, maybe you have questions, comments, anything you would like to know in addition to everything I already told you about myself. I feel like I was like at a psychiatrist talking about myself too much. What's in the chat?
Well, I'd like to really thank you for being our speaker and for doing so much wonderful preparation. This has been one of our best talks. This is great.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I actually have a couple of these talks to your group on my list to watch, because I'm really interested in some of the authors you invited. So I'm so happy to be in that group of authors. Thank you so much again.
I think we're all very, very happy that you accepted our invitation, and Billy did another great job. And this.
Oh, sorry, we can't hear you anymore.
Muted out there, Donna.
Oh. She's coming back. Ivana, I like that you talked a little bit about the former Yugoslavia and what you lived through and your comics influences. I was lucky enough to visit Sasha in Pančevo about 10 years ago, and I was amazed that Disney characters are so popular in the former Yugoslavia and Serbia. And I think even Tito, who was Yugoslavia's benevolent dictator, he loved Disney and welcomed Disney comics in his country, as far as I can recall. In America, we tended to think of just East and West, and it was an education for me to visit Serbia and learn some history, that they were non-aligned, and I think they called it the third way, maybe, of we're not going to get into this Cold War. We're going to be our own thing. And you can be a socialist country but still love Disney, which was
Yes.
fantastic.
Yeah, we did have influences from all over the world, and opportunities to read books, watch movies that are from the East and from the West. I remember watching the BBC Pride and Prejudice, for example, and then after that some Russian movies. So it was a good combo. It was pretty good education, I have to say. I don't think it's at the same level anymore, unfortunately, but yes, like you say, we had Disney characters, we had a lot of that entertainment that came from America. I watched Dynasty. What can I tell you? Kind of like, we all did. I admit. Shoot me.
I'm suddenly
Well, I
remembering.
mentioned that when the Iron Curtain came down, almost immediately, I had at comics convention people from Hungary and Serbia and a lot of other people coming up to the table, because I suddenly had a readership in Eastern Europe. And
Yes.
there are some great reviews full of illustrations, which I've never been able to find translations, but it was astounding how much immediate interest our work got when the Iron Curtain came down.
Yeah, people were hungry for things like that, especially behind the Iron Curtain, which was really way more restrictive than former Yugoslavia. Like people from former Yugoslavia, for example, didn't have restrictions on travel. We could go abroad, we could go to Western Europe, we all made biannual shopping trip to Trieste in Italy to buy Levi's. It had to be.
Can I tell a quick story about one
Sure.
Hungarian that walked up to my table? He came up and he says, "Your book, The Desert Peach," and I thought, "Uh-oh, I'm going to get it." And he put his finger on it and tapped hard and went, "You understand?" And then he walked off, and I'm like, "Understand what?" I must have hit a nerve there somewhere.
For sure. Yeah, it was a smorgasbord of different things. I gotta tell you, and there were some really interesting festivals as well. At some point, we had the world's best theater festival. And we could watch plays from Japan, from the US, from you name it. And then there was a film festival. It's still running. It's pretty good. So yeah, I mean, slightly different than from behind the Iron Curtain, but same sentiment, similar culture, Slavic culture mixed with Mediterranean. And I think hospitality is pretty big. David can testify to that, although he was fed, I hear, fish soup every day.
I don't eat. I don't really eat meat, and that's a big part of the diet in Serbia. But I eat fish, so that helped me find something to eat.
I mean, yeah, it's a country of carnivores, unfortunately, still. Pig on a stick is a big thing. Once we chased away Turks, I guess people just wanted to have pork all the time. So it's still going strong, and I'm not sure if it's ever going to stop. But yeah, right now, like if you do want to visit an interesting country, Belgrade is a great place to visit. If you get a chance, I definitely recommend it. A lot of art, a lot of good music, good food. It even has a Michelin list. shockingly. So yeah, especially quality of nightlife. I mean, I know you're all party people.
And I was there for a comics festival called Novodoba,
Yes.
which happens every year, and it was fantastic. It's a week-long festival of comics and creativity. And
Nice.
in neighboring Pančevo, Sasha has the GR Festival, spelled GRRR, which is like a side festival to Novodoba, and they're both great.
Lovely to hear that. And I know this, the country actually signed, believe it or not, there's a bilateral agreement with France in terms of comic art. So just so you know, maybe we should do something about Canada signing one and America as well.
What does that mean?
Well, it means that, for example, we exchange residences. So there is a comic arts residency in, I think, Pančevo, and in exchange we get a comic art residency in Angoulême, which is a good deal. Plus, there is participation by French artists in festivals, same as Serbian artists in France. And even we have a person who was awarded a really high honor, was given the Chevalier order, I guess, for her work to help comic arts community. Her name is Jana Adamović. She's a very dynamic young woman who actually doesn't want to keep quiet if she sees something that's not good for creators, and especially for female creators. So that was recognized with a really, really phenomenal level of level award by France. And we have a French cultural center that's very, very active in Belgrade, has exhibitions all the time, and especially comic art exhibitions, talks, they bring guests. There's quite a lot of work that's happening. We also have, I think, one person who is currently studying for her is a master's or PhD in Belgium at the Comic Arts Academy. So, you know, those connections are working pretty well. We do have a lot of creators who are working for the French market as well. So, you know, the connections, yeah, even official, you know, government connections at this point.
Yeah. Sasha sent me an anthology of, I think, Serbian cartoonists making comics about France from their residency in France. And one thing I learned from visiting this festival is it's, you know, largely sponsored by the local government in Pančevo, at least, for the Sasha's festival. And he said, you know, there are some aspects of socialism where we don't want to let go of because it makes a multi-day comics festival possible, which I thought was great. I'm ready for some socialism here in Seattle.
Absolutely. That kind of socialism I'm always in favor of. The type that you know, is supporting arts at that level. That'd be wonderful. I'm not sure if there is a comparable fund for artists in the States. I do know of some artists that did get a Genius grant, right? So there were a few of those, but something like the Canada Art Council, is that available in the
It's
US?
not as available for comics as for fine arts, I would say. America needs to embrace its comics more.
Well, it took a long time for the Canada Council to accept comics as art. I remember applying once and being told that we don't give grants for graphic novels like we don't give out grants for fashion catalogs.
Wow.
Jesus.
I'm glad
Um,
you kept pushing.
No,
and
I've
g-
never succeeded in getting a grant out of the
oh.
Canon Council. But
But
they-
you can have my counsel, Colin, free
um,
of charge.
the Francophony Society here in Vancouver, I believe, actually has worked with our local small press convention, VanCap, which is, I think, how we had Louis Trondheim come over here for one of the VanCaps.
Nice.
Oh, could I ask a quick favor? If we're done with the illustration sharing, if you could go ahead and turn that off, because then we can see, everybody who's making comments and everything. So, because everybody's lovely. It's so
I'm-
good to see everybody.
So Jira's here.
Oh, let's see him. Oh,
You were asking earlier. Now he's
look at him.
licking his butt.
What
I
else?
have to show Colin one of our new cats here.
Oh,
This
hello.
is
Oh my God.
that is Bear, otherwise known as Pouty Bat Face.
Where
I
is
think
my
she
cat?
weighs.
All Zoom meetings eventually wind up with people showing off their cats.
Yeah, and if they don't go get the cats come in and get on the keyboard. They will join. So this has been a wonderful, wonderful meeting. I don't know how many more people can hang around for the evening. I'm beginning to have some evening things I have to do. But again, wow, that was a heck of a presentation, and it sure was nice to see everybody.